someone's LinkedIn post last night because I wanted to see like general what people are saying right now about it. And one person had posted that they thought, because Louisiana recently took away that requirement that you don't have to file the FAFSA as a graduation requirement, which I don't think is a smart move. I mean, they're already one of the lowest states with higher ed. I mean, even high school graduation,
Hmm.
much less, college graduation. Also a less economically diverse state. So there's a lot of need in that state, and
Hmm.
not making filing the FAFSA mandatory as part of high school graduation, I think is a bad move. This person's argument was decoupling it would then no longer make institutions reliant on that FAFSA information to determine enrollment or to figure enrollment. It should be institutional aid only. And then the students who thought they might need financial aid should file a FAFSA, which I don't I don't necessarily
To
agree with that.
quote Han Solo from Star Wars, that's not how the Force works, right?
Right, right. Yes, like totally. I mean, that sounded like somebody who doesn't maybe is only on the fringes of higher ed, probably, or not really
Yeah,
in tune with other diverse groups that are in your enrollment pool who really need this extra support to
yeah,
get that
yeah.
done. So they can afford school or know that it's even an option. Because if you don't do it, you might just assume you can't afford it.
Yep. Well, and it's almost a cut off our nose to spite our face type scenario where the intent is okay, let institutions start packaging, but
Mhm.
if they don't have information that they would use to start packaging or awarding certain awards,
Yeah, not
and
everything is merit.
yeah,
Not everything is merit.
ugh, insanity,
Yeah.
insanity. Well, you were on a webinar recently with Concept 3D on this very topic, and I'd love for you to kind of give us a
Yeah,
high level on that experience and what you guys talked about so that
sure,
we
sure.
we'll use that as the foundation for the conversation.
Okay. Yeah. So we there was a couple of us got together with Shiro from Concept 3D to talk about FOSFA, like the delays and what you can do as an institution to continue nurturing your enrollment pool for fall 2024. And people, every institution has a different approach, but I think the underlying theme of all of that between all of us was educating our applicant pool and their parents too, or whoever's supporting that student, is very important. Not even when you didn't have FAFSA delays or when we were
Mhm.
talking about prior year, like I don't know how many years ago that was, and I'm not going to say because that would kind of date my time in higher ed. But there's been some shifts over the years. So I think every time something has changed in that process, because when you talk about when going back to what I mentioned, I saw on LinkedIn, we are joined with FOSFA results. There is no decoupling of FOSFA results. If your mission is access to education and you truly believe in everybody having this opportunity to attend an institution of higher ed, then you should not by any means remove FOSFA from your process. So in that sense, everybody who talked about educating the population. Zoom webinars still seem to be the number one thing that people are still using, and they tend to be highly attended versus other types of webinars. So Zoom fatigue definitely exists. Not in this topic area though. It seems to be
Yeah, yeah.
um, very well attended, and I think it's because it's in the news. And again, going back to that LinkedIn, there's a lot of, I think, misinformation out there or conflicting information out there that families are also consuming, and they're not quite sure what to do at that time. But I think again, like the biggest thing is trying to educate as much as you can through whatever platform that you can. So we talked about some of the people on the panel with me were using Zeme to communicate. We're using text messages to communicate. We're doing mailers again to remind students of their merit aid and their overall package. Some of us were fortunate enough to get like a financial aid calculator or a CSS profile to try
Mhm.
to get students and their families to use so they can make these educated decisions sooner rather than later. Again, we're still guessing on a FAFSA timeline. We're here mid-March. I think some of us have gotten some files to test, but reality is, in my mind, my timeline, you're drawing on my experience from overseeing financial aid and being a VP of an enrollment at other institutions. This will be, lucky mid-April where we're able to send out award letters to as many people as we package. That's if they didn't get flagged for verification, which DOE has said they would loosen up restrictions this year and flag less, but that's another hurdle for students and their families to cross in order to get the funding information that they need to make a decision.
So I want to go back to a part that you were talking about.
Mhm.
It's interesting with things like Zoom fatigue, right? And
Yeah.
how we have, you and I have been doing virtual event type stuff together for a while now. Worked together on virtual event platforms during COVID,
Yep.
and I think the overarching narrative during that time was people don't attend full sessions or everything that you put out or care about
Mhm.
everything you put out, but they care about what they care about when they care about it, right? And right
Exactly.
now, if you're not hosting, regular presentations and content to update families about things like your prior process for the FAFSA and what your plans are, that's a big miss for a lot of
Yes.
institutions.
Yeah.
You also mentioned educating, right? I think there's some areas where, I think back to when I was in admissions at the University of New Haven in Connecticut, we were doing webinars before webinars were cool, I like to say. And one of the most popular things we did was our financial aid kind of workshop sessions where we educated on basic things. What's the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized? What's the difference between a grant and a loan?
Grow your student community, help them stay, and encourage giving with Cadence, Higher Ed's premier engagement platform from Mongoose. Designed exclusively for higher ed by higher ed professionals, Cadence helps you engage your audiences with the perfect balance of AI and personal connection. Talk to students, parents, and alumni on their time and how they want. Empower your staff with integrated text and chat inboxes that gather all conversations in one place. Reach out to learn more about how our best-in-class service, support, and integrations have helped colleges and universities like yours have smarter conversations. From text to chat, make every message count.
I think one of the most important things that you touched on is making sure we're educating families, right? And I think if you were to wave a magic wand and be able to make sure that all families know X, Y, and Z, what would those things be?
Oh, for one would be file the FAFSA, even if there's a delay right now. If you're seeing things in the news that schools aren't getting the information, which is true, we're not getting your information yet, but we will. And even if you think, I don't know if I qualify, I still think it's worthwhile process to go through it because they have adjusted. What we used to call EFC, expected family contribution, is now student aid income. And I think those are important things to think about moving forward in terms of, what do I qualify for and what do I not qualify for? You don't know until you do it. So it is important to file the FAFSA. And it's not only important for us internally as a marker of progress or how we're doing in our admitted student pool, but important for them as a family to make those decisions, having the most information that you can have in front of you. So definitely want to be pushing that out, that it is a process that you should do, even if you don't think it's like going to happen right now, that we won't get your information right now. That's true. It's not we will not get that immediately. We never did, honestly.
Yeah.
There is a delay, but you need, knowledge is power, and having that knowledge in front of you to help you make those decisions is very important.
Well, and when I remember when I was a student, the overarching narrative was you want to file the FAFSA immediately when you can, like the first possible day to be able to, because it's that's your spot in line to get
First come, first serve,
considered for aid
institutional
packages,
aid,
right? And
those
so
types of things, right? Before we run out. I haven't worked at an institution where we ran out of aid yet. So I don't want to perpetuate that narrative and say like you have to do it immediately, but it is an important piece of that whole college going process. Merit, if we had a great year and we are also watching, for example, our discount rate, then sure, yes, it's very important that you file first, or file as soon as you can so that we can package you and give you this, like the best amount that we can give you.
Yeah, and even if there's not a cap on the amount of aid that's being awarded, but it's you're prioritizing who has filed first because you have full information.
Yes.
You're going to get your information faster, right? So it's not meant to fear monger. It's more meant to just, it's a step in the process, and it's better to have it sit there in the queue waiting for you than for it to not be there.
Right. Because it is, that's a big shift for families and their students, coming from secondary to higher ed, and it can be stressful. So the last thing you want to do is be trying to figure out how you can afford to pay for this college or university that you've decided, you and your family, or your family and your student have decided you're going to attend, and you're putting in financial information, which is already can be a stressful topic for anybody, regardless of what you're doing. So I think, again, it's just that importance of doing it, whether you think you would get anything, whether you think you qualify or not, it's still an important piece of the entire process. And I have heard that, I haven't tried it, but I have heard that it is simpler to do than it has been previous years. So I think that's another.
I think that the overarching kind of feel good part narrative that people are having, that I'm seeing on LinkedIn and in conversations that I'm having, is this is, it's a crappy implementation for this year with the timing and how that's happening. But long term, once we get through this bad, quote unquote, bad cycle, the process will be simpler for families long term, right? And so that's
that's the win.
Things,
That's the win. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to remember in higher ed, is that it's not really about us. It's about these students and their families that we are serving.
And I'm glad you said that, because I think one of the challenges that I've been talking with folks. So, we've had a number of guests over the past few weeks in our continuing coverage of the new FAFSA rollout, right? And so the conversations have kind of ranged from nobody's really panicking, we're just planning for different scenarios. Then there's we're doing all of these things, CSS profile and net price calculators and estimated aid packages based off of SAI and all those sorts of elements. And then there's the sky is falling crowd, right? And so there's a range of people. But I think when you think about the families in this process, many of these families are families that also were impacted by COVID hitting them at the beginning of their high school experience, dealing with isolation issues and dealing with remote education that was pieced together and bought together. And so now that we're dealing with I feel for the families that are in this process, because that's a double whammy to have the beginning of their high school education experience impacted by this global pandemic. And now when they're trying to go to college, this process that is completely out of their control, completely out of the institution's control, but it's impacting them and the stress and anxiety of getting through the process. So in that spirit of like educating, how do you show empathy to families throughout this process, and how should your peers think about doing it that way?
Oh, well, I think again, just if people have questions, answer. There's no wrong question. I know we all probably say that in any higher ed thing that we do, whether it's like like a application workshop, admitted student day, those types of things. But it's making sure that these families and their students know that you're available to them throughout their process. And that part of that too, I think, is not feeding into that fear mongering, the sky is falling group, and really going into like, okay, we know there's a bump in the road. This is what we're doing to help our community get through it. And then next year, moving forward, here's what we're going to do to make sure that you have a smooth sailing from here on out. There's nothing we can control that the DOE is doing. It is out of our control. The only thing that we can control is when it gets here, when we get those ICERs, how we process them, and how we communicate that information to our populations. And that's
Yeah.
what we really need to focus on.
Well,
to
and
keep a positive experience.
And in an election year, if there's one thing we can all agree on, is that we can all just blame the government for all these.
Right. I mean, yes, it isn't us. This time it isn't us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we get these ICERs and we fall flat on our faces in the processing piece and getting this information out to students and their families because we didn't prepare, because I mean, if you want to look at another positive thing, you've had this entire timeline to prepare for the unknown, I guess, because you don't really know how this info is going to come in. But it's an opportunity for you and your staff to think about, how can we support questions? Do we need to beef up like our chat hours? Do we have a live chat? Do we have AI chat that we're relying on?
And are the answers in the AI chat going to be accurate based on the current situation?
Yes, exactly. Yes. Or even if you don't have AI chat, if it's one that you're feeding information to, make sure you're updating that and that you've reviewed the information in there. Because you want to make sure every mode of communication that you have with your parents and their students is available to them and is accurate. That's going to be the number one thing that will likely then cause parents to lose faith in you as an institution.
Absolutely.
Not having this accurate information available to them.
Yeah.
Thoughtfully nurture applicants, personalize retention efforts, and exceed fundraising goals with our Cadence Engagement Platform's text messaging solutions. Designed exclusively for higher ed by higher ed professionals, Cadence helps you engage your audiences with the perfect balance of AI and personal connection. We leverage an intuitively designed interface and easy-to-use texting templates so you can have targeted conversations or scale up to expand your reach. Our powerful smart messaging can respond automatically, exactly how you would. And to measure progress, track your campaigns with unparalleled reports and analytics. Effectively meet your community where they are as we proudly feature an industry-leading 95% read rate within 3 minutes. It's never been easier to make every message count.
So when I originally reached out to you about being on the podcast, the topic was going to be focused on yield, right? And the plan was to have this great conversation about planning for yield for this cycle. We're going to drop it in towards the end of April, and it's going to be right. And obviously the situation has changed and evolved, right? And so, but I do want to talk to you about what your thoughts are on the new FAFSA rollout and the potential impacts on yield. And I'll lay that foundation for that question with, we obviously are seeing, currently we're seeing a pretty significant decrease in new FAFSA filing this cycle, in large part because of these challenges. What are your predictions as far as the impact that this is going to have on yield for institutions when it comes to timing of packages being available, May 1st deadlines, and if and when those get adjusted, the reality of kind of a truncated timetable, because we don't have the same data that we would normally have in our predictive models that help us to guide a lot of these decisions, right? What are your thoughts on new FAFSA rollout and the impact on yield? Okay,
so new FAFSA rollout impact on yield. Obviously, May 1 is no longer it's not a thing. In my opinion, it's an institutional benchmark. We created it for ourselves, so we would have a good idea of what fall would look like and what we needed to do to make our fall numbers. So May looked like May 1 is close. I mean, we might as well made it May 4th. That would have been great. But hey, they didn't ask us, Gil. So
Star Wars references abound.
Yes. So I think, this year, if you are at an institution that had, formerly relied on May 1 as your benchmark for the fall, that's nice, but that's probably not what's going to happen. Obviously, you can see that with people extending their deposit deadlines, into mid-May. I would not be shocked to see some of the more, the bigger institutions, the more selective institutions extend even deeper into the month of May. And so for the rest of us, I think that means it's going to be more of an extended yield season. It always has been where we're on a rolling admissions So yield happened all summer, or we are still working past some of like other priority deadlines where we've been a second choice institution. So it's not anything new for us, but for some people this might be a new thing. So one, I think, is, again, I just think it's going to be whoever gets that package information out the door the quickest is going to be at the top of lists. If you were already a 1, 2, or 3 on a applicant status in terms of applying, and now it's even more critical to have that information out quicker, because your timeline is truncated. So they have less of a time to make this decision, but they're also going to feel more pressured, because before, a lot of times they like to have this decision made, here's where I'm going, before graduation, so everybody can announce it and I can tell my friends and family, here's where I'm going to go, here's my scholarship amounts, those types of things. So definitely it's going to be who can get that information packaged and out the door. So that's going to extend your yield season. And it's going to roll into melt. So melt is also going to be very, not that it wasn't always a serious thing to consider over the summer, but even more so now, because now when families are comparing their offers, it's not just we've packaged and awarded, here you go. It's going to be we've packaged and awarded, and now we are expecting some feedback where they might ask us for, is there additional aid available? I would expect later change of circumstances forms that groups will have to look at, however that process is at your institution, to determine aid, which will also impact yield. The way to extending the deadline for the more selective service universities also going to impact other people's yields, because now they'll be potentially going into their wait lists a little bit deeper or a little bit longer than what we are used to. For if you're a second or third choice, definitely going to extend that yield season out even further.
So I want to talk about particularly the timeline piece, because I think there's different categories of institutions that students are enrolling at, and for many institutions that know that they're not always the top choice of every student that they've admitted, every cycle there's the inevitable time when the flagship public or the larger school or the more selected school goes to their wait list to fill specific pockets or what have you. And so that trickles down into the next level of schools. That timeline is going to now completely change or is pushed back. And we run into issues with budgeting on campuses and issues with of orientations and all of those sorts of things. So for institutions in that latter category, what are some things you think we should think about doing to insulate ourselves from the waterfall that effect that is inevitable?
I think, for one, don't neglect your current applicant pool, even if you feel like you have met your goal, your application goal that you had in order to get the class that you wanted. It's not a usual year. Again, it's not a usual year. So like we're going into 3 years of weird enrollment years. I really thought this was going to be my benchmark year where the stars aligned. This is like anything, I've told you before, Gil, anything pre-COVID, those benchmarks don't matter to me anymore, because the whole process has shifted since COVID. It shifted with, there's been delays. We have seen students and their families not apply as early, and it's just trickled through the entire cycle. Now you have this FAFSA piece as well, that's going to shift again in terms of when these decisions come out. So I think don't neglect your applicant pool, your current pool. If you have the ability to do historical modeling on anything at all, lean into that, take a look at that, see if there's some pockets in there that you can continue to work, that maybe they have first or second choices, but if they don't get selected by those, that group would maybe come towards you. So that's a group that I would definitely keep working. So again, don't neglect your applicant pool. Don't neglect your yield pool either. So if again, historical data, if it's showing you that these groups are likely to yield, continue to work them. Even if you're past May 1, I'm sure everybody will be doing the same thing, as continuing to communicate with these groups. But it's not just, here's your award, but think about other stories that you can tell around that supplement your institution. So it's not just affordability, but it's outcomes and it's other learning things that you'll get here at this institution that you might not get at institution A or B. So this is why you should choose C, us, pick us.
Yep. Yep. And I think one of the things, and this is, I like to draw parallels to past things. And I was working with a school years ago that was one of those institutions, and it happens every cycle, that inadvertently sent acceptance notifications to students who had incomplete applications, not, at least they didn't send it to their denied student list, but it was to students who didn't have complete applications. And I was speaking to their VP at that point, and the lemonade out of lemons scenario for that was they had to quickly and proactively reach out to those students, coach them, help them to understand, and they sent a certified letter saying to ignore the other letter and all that sort of stuff. But that at the end of the day, the positive angle of it was it resulted in their admissions counselors having to actually be admissions counselors and not just application processors for that cycle, right? And so this, and I obviously, I have empathy for people who are in these roles while students and families had to go through COVID and the stress and the distance education, all that sort of stuff. Admissions people had to go through that on their end as well, not too long ago. And now we have this kind of extraordinary circumstance that's impacting the cycle for admissions and financial aid officers even in the aftermath of Great Resignation and not having full staffs and having to be more efficient and whatnot. But the opportunity here is to get back to the people side of all of this and focus on supporting families through this process, using your models as a guide, because you're not going to have like you said, this isn't your benchmark year where you can have anything compare year over year. But you can at least use that as here's my priority for the people I need to work with and support, because you have some data available to guide direction.
For sure. Definitely take a look at your historical modeling again, work with IR. I think that's something that I didn't bring up but when we're talking about, this extended yield season and and melt, it's also making sure that you're communicating with other entities across campus that touch your first year population, and making sure that, one, they know what you're doing, but you also know what they're doing, like orientation, like you mentioned. Will this mean that does orientation have to be later? Maybe not, probably not. I think you can keep that the same, but make sure that they know what you are working on and that they're not perhaps sending out conflicting information.
Right.
So you want to make sure like everything is aligned. So it's, again,
Yep.
I think always an issue in higher ed. I think we are known for our silos, and this is an opportunity to absolutely, just like COVID, to bring in those other groups and communicate with them. Like, here's how we think things are going. Here's what we're doing to make these things continue to go the direction that we want to. Throw out some suggestions for them. I did that this morning with one of our colleges when we're talking about, yield. Here's a group that you all can really focus on in terms of yielding for your programs.
Right. And like you said, this is talking to orientation about orientation ahead of time, so you're not conflicting, is something we do every cycle anyway. It's just or should be doing every cycle anyway. Yeah. It's the context now in which why it's so important. It's changed.
Yeah.
So Mary Beth, thank you so much for being on today and for sharing some of your thoughts and insights with our listeners. Before I let you go, I would love for you, this is your time to tell people how the best ways to get in touch with you and to keep that conversation going.
Oh yeah, for sure. You have to find me on LinkedIn, and I think it's MBM in higher ed. That's my LinkedIn handle, or you could just put in Mary Beth Marks. So definitely find me. There's a few of us out there, but I have the most entertaining LinkedIn profile out of all of them by far.
You do.
So
pirate outfits and everything abound. It's a great follow.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, we'll make it easy for our listeners. We'll put a direct link to your LinkedIn in the episode notes. So if you want to if you don't already connect with Mary Beth, please do so there. And we will see you all next time on FYI. Thanks.
Bye.